welcome to the editorial board session. We only have two rules, really, and the first is that we like to get it understood up front that everything said is on the record. Now that we videotape these, that's very apparent. And number two, we take 30 minutes because we don't want one candidate to feel they got more or less time and thus a disadvantage or advantage than the other candidates.
Perfect.
That said, we invite the candidate to introduce themselves, say this is why I'm running for this post at this time. We start asking questions, and 30 minutes goes pretty quick.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for another way to reach out to voters, in particular the huge percentage of voters that are here in Collier. Look, the basic concept is we can do better. We can do better. We live in one of the most fascinating areas of the world, and the things we decide are going to cause repercussions for generations to come. We've been the receivers of a great legacy that our parents left us. I think, a beautiful shoreline. This district contains the largest landmass of the Florida Everglades. It is the largest national forest in Florida and one of the treasures. By the way, the #1 visitor attraction in South Florida. And it's all in this district. We also have one of the most varied districts in the country. It has almost 60+% Hispanic, 20% Anglo, 10% African American, with a mixture of Asian and other at 4%. So it's a very varied district, and so it sort of is on the cutting edge of what America will perhaps someday look like. But it certainly is a place where things are happening. I always like to say that there are places that define the American culture in their time, right? Chicago in the 20s, what was New York in the 40s, California, Los Angeles in particular in the 60s as a defining place, maybe the New South in the 80s, Seattle and the sort of internet culture in the 90s. And I think South Florida sort of defines that America of this moment. Perhaps we don't see it because we're in the middle. We're too close to get perspective on it, but to many degrees, it is precisely a place that our great-grandkids are going to ask us about this place, this time, and how we saw Florida change. And there are a lot of things that we have to decide. We're at the crossroads. What do we do in investing in education? How do we protect our environment? How do we handle the issue of jobs and energy? And in particular, my study of the district, my talking to folks who live here, my understanding of South Florida, there are 3 issues. And the first is jobs, closely followed by the second, which is jobs, and then the third one is jobs. Everybody who wants a job should be able to work, and that's not the case. And so we have to focus in on that. And I think we've missed tremendous opportunities. We have a state that has tremendous wind resources. We have a state that has tremendous solar resources. And then we have a state that has some of the most expensive rates in all the Southeast. And so this begs the question, why aren't we investing in alternative energies? Why did the legislature bypass the ability to put at least a renewable portfolio standard into our utilities to make sure we begin to invest? And those are jobs. And I use one quick example, and then I'll take questions. I think it'll be more fun. The issue of solar water. If you've lived in Florida as long as I have, and I've lived here my whole life, I lived in a house that was built in the 30s, and on the roof it had a solar water heater that had not been really touched very much for more than half a century. And every time I'd turn on the water, it was brutally cold for about 5 seconds, and then just a steaming hot water would come out, and it was all solar power. And the reality, the reason we don't have solar heating, which is, requires very little investment and is very energy neutral, is because at one point in the beginning of the 40s and 50s and 60s, the local energy utilities or power companies would offer the developers, here's a free electric water heater. Obviously, they were trying to increase their usage rate. And at the same time, what would happen is that the developer just got, $1,000 off building a house, but more importantly, or in that time probably $70 off house. But the house, they would advertise, well, now your husband can come home and on a rainy day he can take a shower. Now you can take showers in the middle of the night. Well, you can with solar heated water. But the reality is we're not thinking in terms of true efficiencies and how to maximize that. And we've got to take a step back as a country when you're looking and seeing what is happening in the Gulf Coast. Whatever savings we got from drilling in that place at that time so that we could pay a little bit less for gasoline. We are going to be paying for the next decade and a half. The latest estimate says that 200,000 Floridians are going to lose jobs, and that this is going to be a cleanup effort that is going to last for more than 5 years in the best case scenario. And so we're looking at this. We've got a petition out. I mean, my opponent here will likely be my opponent on the Republican side, was for offshore drilling 3 miles from our coast. I've always opposed it, and I think it's a huge mistake. But more so than opposing it, it's not saying no. It's what's the alternative? Well, there's a lot of alternatives. We're developing those alternatives. And Floridians, unlike other consumers in the rest of the country, we use more energy than any other part of the country. And per citizen, we intake more electricity because, let's face it, without air conditioning, parts of Florida would not be habitable. And so the reality is we are hard-pressed to do this. We should do it, and we as a state should be investing in this. We're not.
Joe, we've heard from a number of congressional candidates that jobs, they must, well, obviously you're hearing that out there,
right,
from the constituents and the voters, jobs, jobs, jobs. The question is, where does Congress come into that? We tried the stimulus program. It was to help create jobs,
right,
et cetera. What can Congress do?
Well, look, I worked in the administration. As you know, I worked in the Department of Energy, and I saw close hand the massive investment that we've made in new energy technology and new technologies and clean technologies, trying to green America's energy sources. I think that's a very wise investment. Look, I'm not a believer that government is the solution to all things, but what I do know, and I think is important, is that government can do things that individuals cannot. In certain aspects, the concept of building a road, the concept of long-term planning, the ability to sort of say, look, as a society, we're going to take a small hit here so that we can have a long-term benefit. And that is true in jobs. That is true in things like energy. The classic example where government is not thinking long-term is the Gulf oil exploration. Yeah, that's the cheap fix. And it looked like a really good cheap fix. So much so that 2 weeks before the Gulf oil spill, the President of the United States says, we got to do more of this. Right. Since then, we're saying we can't do any more of it. So when you stop doing that, you have a realistic energy alternative that you can invest in. So we need to spend money in training Floridians, spend money in alternative energy, whether it be biomass projects, whether it be solar projects, wind projects, whether it be investing in allowing people to sell and buy energy at a higher rate. To meet that, right now, if you were on this building, had solar panel roofs, and it's a brand new building, and you should have had them, but let's hope you did. But if you didn't,
very green.
I noticed, but the solar panels across the top of this building, and you tried to sell those back to your local utility, you'd probably get 3 or 4 cents for every kilowatt you sold, but it costs about 18 cents to produce that kilowatt based on the cost you paid on the roof. And so the reality is you've got to get a better rate for that kind of investment. Now, I don't want to burden ratepayers to pay more. As you may or may not know, I orchestrated the largest rate increase in the history of the state of Florida when I was chairman of the Florida Public Service Commission. So I know how important rates are. But it's also very important for us to see the long-term system. It's sort of part of the problem we had in the Department of Energy, to give you an example. So we wanted people to invest in microgrids, right? And microgrids do exactly the opposite of what a vertically integrated utility do. It allows you to use all sources of power to shift energy around to maximize its usage. The truth is, when you give sometimes a vertically integrated utility a microgrid, it's sort of like giving a bus company a Ferrari. Yeah, it's very nice to have a Ferrari, and if the government's giving it to us, but you don't maximize its usage. So we have to create more jobs, and I want to get to that. How do we do it?
Yeah.
Well, we got to educate more people. We've got to spend more money on education. This year, community colleges throughout the state turned people away. That's unacceptable. Those are jobs that move away from here because we're not doing it. We have to invest in green technology because Florida has the infrastructure in terms of its housing and its surface and the resources to do that. We have to cut taxes on small business. I think one of the great mistakes that we made in the president's package, and I have to tell you, I worked the small business angle, so we got upwards of $6 billion into the hands of small business. But the reality, the majority of money went to large business because, first of all, large businesses know how to deal with the government, and it's easier to push out of the building.
It's often cited that small business is really where the most new jobs come
Correct. And I think that it creates tremendous opportunities, and we have to lower their tax structure. We have to incentivize for more small business, but we also have to incentivize small business in the technological areas, the ability to sort of integrate the things that are happening in today's technology that doesn't require vertical integration.
When the health bill was being debated in Congress,
Yes.
it was cited a number of times that this could put a burden on small business.
Right.
And two questions. What was your position?
I'm for it. I'm for it, and I have no apologies for it. Is it perfect?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. The healthcare bill is not perfect, but it beats the alternative. And this paper and this community is very focused on being fiscally conservative. Here's the problem with the current healthcare system before this bill. You and I would get hit by the same bus and have the same injuries. You would have a healthcare, and I would have a healthcare. Mine was Blue Cross, yours was Humana. Same exact injury. I would pay one fee, you would pay another fee to the same hospital on the same injury, and the guy who had no health insurance, if I can use you as an example, would pay 4 times what you and I pay. Because as an individual, he couldn't negotiate a fee with a hospital before he walked into the door. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is, we didn't know, but by the way, we would take care of him, right? We know that in America, sooner or later, we're going to take care of you. The problem is we have no idea where his costs are. It could go to your county government, it could go to your local government, somebody could sneak you onto a federal role, but nobody's going to let you die in America for an injury. But the truth is, we just had no idea. And so when America is spending somewhere between 17 and 18% of our gross national product on healthcare, that diminishes us. That is a full 30 to 35% more than our nearest competitor. Now, I don't believe in socialized medicine, and I do think that the president was very smart in keeping private industry there. Now, there are mistakes in the system, right? There's an incentive, if you look at the current system, for you to let your worker off because he gets more income tax credit by not being on your health care than you as an employer and a small employer. Right. We've got to fix that. We don't want people to push folks out there to be on public roles. We don't want to end up with a citizens model that we have in in property insurance, right? So the carrier of last resort is always citizen, and then we have to sit here as a collective community and pray that there's not a hurricane because we know there's not enough money in citizens to cover all the damages in Florida. Likewise, we can't do that with healthcare. But we know that the system is broken. And by the way, even if you have the best healthcare that money can buy in the United States, you still know the system's broken. It's the 52 documents you have to sign every single time you go to see a doctor, the inability to sort of figure out what's going on, the fact that we haven't computerized all this information so we can access it. All these are central problems. I think the president has invested a lot of money in it. Did we get it right? No, but we didn't get welfare reform right when Bill Clinton got it through. But then we fixed it in parts. And the reality is, we had to do the heavy lift. We should have all participated.
Joe, before we go farther, why don't you give us some of your background?
Sure. Well, I born and raised in South Florida. I was a student. I went to a school in South Florida called Belen, and I went to Miami-Dade Community College. Then I went to University of Miami. I was fortunate enough to be a student president, which elongated my college career because I was having way too much fun. And then I went to law school. I took a year off, and I went to law school. In that year, I ran a Salvadoran humanitarian aid group, and then I ran a thing called the Cuban Exodus Relief Fund, which took, it's the first ever program that privately resettled refugees in the United States. So we would say to the U.S. government, every refugee that comes in costs the U.S. government an average of between $10,000 and $25,000 a year to resettle in the United States. We said to the federal government, look, if they qualify as a refugee, we'll take care for the costs. And so we paid for private health care, we found them a job, and we found them housing before they arrived in the United States, and we brought 10,000 people. We were so successful, I ran out of Cubans to process. I finished law school, because I did that while I was in law school. And then I was fortunate enough to be named by Lawton Childs to the Florida Public Service Commission. It was, and I want to say this because, Lawton is someone that always asks the right question. And I'll never forget, to get on the Public Service Commission, and there are several articles today about companies interviewing people before they apply to the job and all this stuff that goes on. I will tell you, it is not the cleanest and the most pristine process, right? And you go through this process, and by the time I got to the governor, I said, "What is this guy going to ask me for?" I was dumbfounded, and I also had made the mistake that I showed up a week early. I made a mistake. I wrote, and I showed up a week, and the governor, Georgia was the name of the governor's secretary that sat out in reception, and she said, "No, the governor will see you." She had a beautiful Southern accent. she let me into the office, and the governor said, well, you really did want to make an impression. I said, well, you know, Hispanics have this reputation. I wanted to make sure I got here early. And the governor, you know, he said to me, yeah, I got one question for you. And I would say, yeah, this is going to be something about, can you talk to so-and-so? Can you? And he said, can you vote your conscience? That's all I ask. And he literally didn't ask me anything else. He said, look, my people have vetted you. We've looked at who you are. We think you're a good guy. But can you vote your conscience? And I think that's the central role of anybody in public life. So anyway, I did that for 6 years. It was a great opportunity. I helped restructure the telephone industry in Florida, much to the benefit of Floridians. I began some of the energy restructuring, but the Supreme Court turned me down.
What years were you on?
I was on the Public Service Commission from '94 to about 2000. And then the incidents that happened in South Florida around Elian and a group of Cuban-American businessmen who I'd worked with before at the Cuban-American National Foundation asked me to come home to run the Cuban-American National Foundation. I took that organization, which to some degree I think was one of the most important vehicles that community had, and obviously after the events of Elian was looking to redefine itself, and I did that job for quite a while. And it was something I tremendously enjoyed. Then I practiced a little bit of law on the side, and did some consulting. And then a little bit before, about 2004, I joined a group out of Washington called NDN. And NDN is a politics think tank. And so what we did is educate progressives on new demographic trends, on economic models, on how to speak to minorities as a part of key constituencies in America. And I did that for 4 years. And then in a little towards the end of 2007, I started looking at the congressional seat. I ran last time, and we came close, but there's no second place in this sport. Or as, what is the line? I got the silver medal. Yeah, I got the silver medal in that race. I ran against Mario. Mario's a very well-known entity, and he ran a very good campaign. He beat me.
You're party chair in there somewhere too, right?
Right. I was party chair at Dade County, which we organized the party, made it work a little bit better. I did that job until I filed to run for Congress because it was required by law. You can't run a state institution. And so I finished that, and I was fortunate because I had subject matter expertise in energy. I was offered a position by the Obama administration in the Energy Department.
What did you do?
I was director of the Office of Economic Impact.
What does that mean?
Basically, I ran what is the Small Business Office for the Department of Energy. I ran the Civil Rights Office as an attorney. I also ran the Civil Rights Division.
But what does that mean?
Make sure that we're in compliance with all federal laws dealing with employees and contractors, right? So you can't give federal monies to someone who's out of compliance with federal law.
Okay.
And then I also ran the Minority Education Initiative inside. The Department of Energy is the largest research arm of the federal government. People don't really know this, but they spend more money because we have, I think it's 18 federal labs that do things from pure physics to solar technology to nuclear technology, and we do all this on a broad spectrum, but we hire universities to do that. And many times MIT is right in the front of the line to get their share of the money, but smaller historically black colleges or Hispanic serving institutions or tribal don't get enough. And so we want to make sure that they're part of that so that we can raise all ships. And I know the office did one more thing, but I'm trying to remember it. But we did a lot of that, and then we also did a little bit of consulting through the Department of Energy on energy in Latin America because I've got some expertise in the area, and we did that. And then I had just hung up. I went through the FBI security check, which many people don't make it through, and then I went through the Senate check, and the Senate confirmed me in October of last year, and the presidential commission takes about 3 months to get there, and it's signed by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And 3 days before Mario resigned, I had just placed it on the wall. I just finished my office. But I stayed here because my wife is a general counsel at the University of Miami, and she says someone has to have an honest job for a living, and so I would commute. I would go up on Mondays.
So how long did you actually do that?
I went from, I think it was June of last year till April of this year.
So a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then so I resigned. By law, you can't run for federal office, and the rest is history.
Let me ask you, you expect to be running against David Rivera.
Most probably. He's probably, by the way, he's going to have a tough race, but if you look at just one of the factors, which is an unfortunate one in politics, and it's why politics is broken, it's a lot of times about money, particularly in a primary fight.
He'll have trouble raising money?
No, he will have so
okay.
much money
Okay.
that
Okay.
because of the way he's done it, right?
Okay.
Which I'm very clear about this. I believe he's in violation of state law because he was chairman of the budget committee that was giving away $65 billion. And you could imagine who was writing him checks while he was running for Congress while he still served as budget chair. And if one reads the Florida law, it's specifically written to disallow, to prohibit this, but somehow his reading of the law is different than my own. But I think it'll be fairly clear to say that he will have an inordinate amount of money.
My question is, I'm going to kind of grope toward this, and if I go off in the wrong way, forgive me.
Sorry.
But okay, it seems from afar, and Collier County feels like it's sort of on the outside looking into this district in a lot of ways. But we have Rivera, a heavy hitter with Republicans, and you, a heavy hitter with the Democrats. But because of your backgrounds, it seems like races like this often come down to your Hispanic roots and how you connect with different constituencies within that. And you know, where you're from or where the nationalities are seem to matter a great deal over there.
I think.
And how will that play out? And
I think that would be unfortunate. I think we should, this district in particular, should be beyond ethnic politics. The reality is, and it should also be beyond partisan politics. This is a district which is pretty evenly divided. It's 36% Democrat, 35% Republican, and my math is pretty bad, but more or less 30 or 29% independent or other. And the reality is, you know, when I go see my mechanic, I never check with him to see if he's a Republican or a Democrat. I just want him to fix the problem. I want him to be a nice guy, but I also want him to fix the problem. If I hire a carpenter, I've never met a Republican carpenter or a Democratic carpenter that do the job differently. They may be different styles, but in the end, it's not their political persuasion. And I think Americans are past this. We look at people and we ask them to solve a problem, and this district has a problem, right? It is the worst. It receives less federal funds than any district in the state of Florida. It requires someone to stand up there and lead. And they have to lead, they have to lead on what it is to be a coastal community, what it is to be a community that has a lot of development but lives on the edge of one of the most important natural resources the country has. It has to protect the last agricultural land in the south of Florida. You know, Homestead, Florida, along with Immokalee, are the most productive land in Florida per acre, even though they don't necessarily have the best land. And that's because of the people that are there. We also have the most sprawling suburbs in the state, right? Both on this Golden Gate side, on the Collier side, and on the borders of Miami-Dade County, where quite literally, you know, you can throw a rock out of your backyard and hit the Everglades. And so those are things that we've got to engage in, and we've got to be involved in. That's why agriculture is key to that area, transportation is key to that area, healthcare is key to that area. And believe it or not, they are among the least served in those areas.
you mentioned the importance of jobs and missed opportunities in the past. Did that include the federal stimulus package?
Well, look, the height of absurdity is that Charlie Crist will probably call in the legislature to spend whatever money Barack Obama eventually sends here. And so they have disavowed themselves of him to spend the money that his hug got us. And to some degree, it's why I think that this vision about that we're not all in the same place. I believe in the stimulus package. Could have been handled better? Absolutely, it should have been handled better. But let me tell you, as someone who's been inside a government, I know it's broken, and it requires a true, deep, systematic reform, which you don't do in the middle of a crisis. But I do think, in the end, had it not been for the stimulus package, we'd be in a worse place. And look, I remember when I came and did 2 interviews with you all last time on this. You know, you guys talked about tax policy very specifically, and you were interested about tax policy. And what concerned me was the mortgage crisis, because it started here before it started anywhere else in Florida. In fact, this had the worst foreclosure rates And I was walking the neighborhoods, right? So I could feel it. There were streets where I would walk and there'd be 4 or 5 houses for sale in less than a block. And that got worse, not better. And I thought that we should have done more. And I don't think government did. I think some of the incentives that the president put in to sort of buy property to live first-time homeowners should be extended, and I'm going to be an advocate for that. We have to simplify the SBA program, because I think, if I can ever suggest a good story, is you should have a small businessman apply for an SBA loan and figure out how long that takes, because it's an absurdity. And here's someone in a tough economic time trying to get a hand, and you go through this process, and it is bureaucratic, inefficient, and in the end doesn't do what we want to do, which is to get money into the hands of small business. This is because they hire much more. When I give a large pot of money to a large institution, they know how to absorb it, they know how to plan out with it, and they hold it, and they spend it in a very different. When I give a mom and pop business a little bit more money, they bring someone into their shop, they help it produce more. And so I'm a big believer that we have to re-engage certain aspects of government and reformulate. There was and now I'm showing my age, but there was a book that was very popular in the 80s, which was called, what was it called? Rethinking Government, or redesigning, or reinventing government. I'm a big believer that we have to look at everything from the bottom up and do it efficiently. The same way that I have to decide priorities in my home when I spend money, government should do the same thing. Public money is no less valuable than private money, and we have to be conservative and restrained when we do that. And I'm a fiscal hawk. But I also understand that government is a tool to sort of do things that can be done by no other arena.
Joe, we're kind of running out of time.
Sure.
Can I just go down some of the major issues and get, one's immigration.
Right.
And Arizona, the law that was passed there, we thought that the argument Congress isn't doing anything, so as a state we're going to do something.
Well, imagine if I wanted to pass, I don't know, laws to prohibit spousal abuse, so I beat up spouses. If that was my way of promoting, someone's going to have to act, because as long as I keep beating up women, the federal government will step in, and beating up the less fortunate that we need in our society, because we need them. The truth is that today we balance our Social Security budget on people who have fake Social Security cards that are paying into the system, and the truth is that we know that in the next decade we're going to need We're going to need the 13 million that are already here, and in the decade after that, we're going to need another 5 million.
So what kind of bill in Congress?
We need an overall total comprehensive immigration reform. We need to close our borders, make our country safe, and make sure people that are here, we know who they are and what they're doing here. Secondly, we need to take a process where those that have committed a crime, we need to get them out of the country right away, and we know who they are, right? We know who these people are. They are under law. They have very little process. Most of that process has been handled. We need to get them out of the country, and that is all laws that they violate. Criminals should not be in the country. And then finally, we have to figure out a worker solution. You have Immokalee a stone's throw from where we're sitting here, and it produces a lot of the wealth that we benefit from. And in fact, we can afford a tomato in Florida precisely because we've got workers that are willing to do jobs that have to be done. And so we have to have an immigration program that brings the best and the brightest in America to do well, but that protects our workers, and then finally that brings in temporary workers that get jobs done that have to be done.
What does close the borders mean?
Well, it means that we have to have a system that validates who's coming and why they're coming, and have a long-term understanding of what they're doing, and that requires a relationship with our neighbors. For example, in New Mexico, illegal immigrants, when they, or immigrants, or people who aren't from New Mexico, when they try to get a license and they say, I was born in Mexico, they have a system which verifies if the person was born in Mexico. And we know that Jose Juarez was born in Mexico, in the city he says, and then we've got so we've got some verification. We've got to go that broader. But I want you to understand, it's not only the borders. 30% of the people that are in the country came in with a legitimate visa and overstayed. So these aren't people, all of them aren't scampering across the borders. It's that we don't have a system that verifies, follows, and tracks, and knows what these folks are doing. But I will say, and it's very difficult for me to say, and I read this in one of your editorials where you made a strong position, but the phrase, show me your papers, almost sounds un-American. And I know we do it every day to come into a building, and we do it every day in certain aspects of our lives, but the idea of a police officer being required to be in immigration is just inefficient. The police officers have more than enough to do. What we have to do is have an immigration system that works, that lets us maximize our workforce, that protects jobs in the United States, that protects our security first and foremost, And that can be done, but you can't do it piecemeal, and you certainly can't do it going after the weakest in society.
I think we're out of time.
That was
Thank
fun.
you.
That's the last word.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it.
Good luck.
Thanks.